A little girl ran to a Mafia boss crying for help, and what he did next stunned everyone. She's 7 years old, soaking wet, sobbing. She walks 14 blocks in the rain to the only person she can think of, a man the entire neighborhood is afraid to look in the eye. Her mother was taken, ripped from her job by a raid that was never supposed to happen, ordered by the one man who was supposed to sign her paychecks. Now a man who spent 40 years taking from people has 30 days to save a woman he's never met. Using money he swore he'd never touch, calling in favors he swore he'd never use. The most feared man in Philadelphia is about to fight the hardest battle of his life, and his only weapon is a promise he made to a 7-year-old girl. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, have you ever been helped by the last person you expected? I'd love to hear that story. Passyunk Avenue smelled like provolone and roasted peppers. It always did at dusk, when the heat from Caruso's deli drifted out through the vents and settled over the sidewalk like a warm hand. People walked through it on their way home. Some of them slowed down. Almost none of them went inside. Not because the food was bad. The food was extraordinary. Because of the man at the corner table. Victor Caruso, 68 years old, sat where he always sat. The last booth on the left, his back to the wall, a cup of black coffee going cold in front of him. He was a big man who had learned to make himself small. His shoulders curved inward. His hands, thick and scarred, rested flat on the table like they were holding something down. He wore a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the plaid had faded to almost nothing. He looked like a man who had decided at some point that he had already used up his share of the world's attention. The neighborhood knew the story. Everyone knew the story. Victor Caruso had run Philadelphia's most feared crime organization for over 2 decades. Not rumor, not myth, fact. The kind of fact people kept in their mouths like a stone, never quite swallowed, never quite spit out. And then, 15 years ago, he had walked away. No explanation, no farewell, just gone. From that world and into this one, a deli, Passyunk Avenue, the corner table where no one sat. They said it happened after his daughter died. Angela, 23 years old, an overdose. That was all anyone would say, and anyone who knew more wasn't saying it. The new regular at the counter leaned toward the woman next to him. "Can I sit anywhere?" She didn't look up from her coffee. "Anywhere you want," she said, "except that table." He looked at the empty booth. "Why not?" She just shook her head. Victor's routine was precise and unchanging. He opened the deli alone at 5 in the morning. He fed the stray cats behind the dumpster, 3 of them, nameless, who appeared without fail at the sound of the back door. He worked the counter through lunch, said exactly as much as was necessary and no more, and ate his dinner alone at the corner table in silence. He didn't listen to music. He didn't read. He sat, and he watched the street through the window, and he went home. There was one variation, one small, unscheduled thing. Every weekday, at approximately 3:15 in the afternoon, a little girl appeared at the deli window, 7 years old, a red backpack held together with a safety pin, red rain boots, every single day, rain or shine. She would press her face against the glass, nose flattened, breath fogging the pain, and wave at Victor with her whole arm. He never waved back, but he always looked up. A mother came in one afternoon with a toddler who wobbled toward Victor's booth with the fearless gravity of a very small person. The mother caught the child by the hood and pulled him back, whispering an apology. Victor didn't react. He watched them go without expression, then looked back at his coffee. In the kitchen, taped to the inside of the cabinet above the prep counter, not on the outside where customers might see it, but hidden, facing inward, was a crayon drawing, faded. The paper had gone the color of old cream. A house, 2 stick figures, a lopsided sun, a child's name written in the corner in wobbly letters, Angela. No one but Victor ever saw it. The rain started at 3 o'clock that October evening, not a drizzle. A full, sudden downpour that emptied the avenue in minutes. The deli cleared out early. The last customer paid and left, and Victor locked the register and stood at the window, watching the rain fall in silver sheets against the streetlights. He checked the clock. 3:37. The girl hadn't waved today. He told himself it meant nothing. She had probably gone home a different way, or her mother had picked her up, or she had stayed at a friend's house because of the rain. He stood at the window for another minute, watching the empty street. Then he turned back to the counter, and the rain kept falling, and the deli was very quiet. The door didn't open. It crashed. Victor spun around to see a small shape burst through the entrance, soaking wet from crown to boot, trailing puddles across the tile floor, the red backpack, the uneven bob plastered to her face. Lily Huang, 7 years old, ran straight past the counter and across the empty deli without hesitating, as if she had done it 100 times, and threw herself into the booth across from Victor's corner table. She was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Victor didn't move. He stood 6 feet away and stared at this child who had appeared in his deli like a small, soaking disaster. And for a long moment, he had absolutely no idea what to do. No one sat across from him at that table. No one had in years, certainly not a child. She looked up at him through wet hair and a face swollen with crying. "You always look up when I wave," she said, "so I knew you were real." Victor sat down, carefully, like a man lowering himself into uncertain water. He put a paper napkin on the table in front of her. She grabbed it and pressed it to her face. He watched her cry and thought about every possible thing he could say, and discarded all of them, and reached over to the counter and put a piece of plain bread in front of her instead. She ate it in 4 bites without stopping crying. Between sobs, in fragments, she told him. Her mom hadn't come to school, she'd waited. The monitor stayed 30 minutes past pickup and then left. She had walked 14 blocks in the rain because... She paused here, pulling in a long, shaking breath, because her mom always said, if you're ever lost, go where people feed you. "Mean people don't share food," Lily said, looking at the bread. "So I knew you would help." Victor looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his phone. He made 2 calls. The first one took 4 minutes. He kept his voice low and even, asked 3 questions, and listened without expression. When he hung up, he sat very still. The second call took less than 2. He said even less. Mei Huang, hotel housekeeper, Wyndham Grand, Center City, green card valid. Detained in a workplace raid that afternoon. 9 workers total, taken without warning, documents now listed as missing in processing. He put the phone down on the table. "Her green card is valid," he said, to no one in particular. The second call had told him more. A contact who knew that inside of those situations, the way a man learns the rooms of a house he's lived in too long. The raid hadn't been random. Hotel General Manager Craig Linden, 52 years old, had made a phone call 3 weeks prior. He co-owned a staffing agency. He had been systematically voiding his housekeeping contracts and replacing the workers through his own company. Labor at a fraction of the cost, off the books. $340,000 a year, straight into his pocket. 9 women had been in the way of that number. 9 women with valid documentation whose paperwork was now missing. Victor looked across the table. Lily had stopped crying. She had somehow, in the previous 2 minutes, located the half-eaten meatball sub Victor had left on the prep counter, and she was eating it with both hands, her feet swinging above the floor. She looked up and found him watching her. "Is my mom okay?" she said. Victor chose his words the way he chose everything, carefully and without waste. "She's being held somewhere she shouldn't be," he said. "I'm going to work on that." Lily considered this. She took another bite of the sandwich. "Okay," she said. Victor stood. He walked to the front of the deli and turned the deadbolt. The lock clicked shut. He stood there for a moment with his hand still on the bolt, looking at the rain falling on the empty avenue. Then he walked back and pulled his coat off the hook by the register. "Come on," he said. Lily grabbed her backpack and slid out of the booth. She didn't ask where they were going. She followed him toward the back door without hesitation. This man the entire neighborhood was afraid to sit near, as if the most natural thing in the world was to trust him. Victor's row house was 6 blocks from the deli. He'd lived there for 11 years and had never once described it as home. Not out loud, not even in his head. It was a place where he kept his clothes and slept between shifts. The rooms were clean and nearly empty, the way a space looks when someone has been making themselves as small as possible inside it for a very long time. Lily walked in and looked around with the frank assessment of a child cataloging a new environment. "It smells like the deli," she said. Victor hung up her soaking coat. He put a towel on the bathroom counter and found a dry flannel shirt that fell to her knees and told her to put it on. While she changed, he heated a can of tomato soup and set it on the kitchen table with crackers. He moved through the narrow kitchen with the same precision he moved through everything. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Except that his hands weren't quite steady. He hadn't had anyone in this house in over a decade. He made the phone call to Rosa Gutierrez while Lily was eating. Rosa picked up on the second ring, and he could hear the particular silence on her end that meant she was already preparing herself. They had history. Enough that she recognized his number, enough that she knew when he called at night it wasn't casual. He explained it quickly. Mei Huang. 9 detainees. Missing documentation. A general manager named Craig Linden who had engineered the whole thing for profit. Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Victor," her voice was measured, "careful. You know getting involved publicly could unravel everything you've built since you walked away." "She's 7, Rosa." Another silence, shorter this time. 15,000 retainer, she said. "I'll need everything you have on Linden by morning." He told her he'd get it. He hung up and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Lily scrape the bottom of her soup bowl. The lockbox was in his bedroom closet, on the floor behind a stack of old work boots. He hadn't opened it in 15 years. He knew the combination the way you know a scar. Not because you check it, but because it's there. He crouched in front of it in the dark and worked the dial and lifted the lid. $230,000. Old bills banded and stacked, money from a life he'd buried. He had told himself for 15 years that he couldn't spend it. Not because he needed it, he didn't, but because spending it would mean that life had produced something of value, and he could not live with that. Every dollar in that box was the ghost of something he could not name, wrapped in paper and locked in a closet, and leaving it untouched was the closest thing to punishment he had been able to make himself pay. He stared at the stacks for a long moment. Then he counted out 15,000, wrote Rosa's check on the kitchen counter, and set it by the door. He made up the couch with a blanket and a spare pillow. Lily came out of the bathroom in his flannel shirt, her hair towel-dried and sticking up at odd angles. She climbed onto the couch without being told, pulled the blanket to her chin, and looked up at him. "Is there a light you can leave on?" she asked. Victor looked at her. Such a small shape under that blanket. Such an ordinary request. He went to the kitchen and turned on the light over the stove. It threw a pale square into the hallway, just enough to soften the dark. He sat in the armchair across the room and listened to her breathing slow. At the far end of the hallway, there was a closed door he had not opened in 15 years. Angela's room. He didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on the kitchen light and listened to Lily breathe and told himself not to remember. But memory doesn't negotiate. It came anyway. Angela at this age, same sound, that specific rhythm of a child giving in to sleep. And he sat with it, the way you sit with something that could break you if you let it. And he didn't let it. After a while, the breathing from the couch went deep and even. Victor didn't sleep. He sat in the chair until the kitchen light grayed into morning, holding the check in his hands. The first money from the lockbox. The first withdrawal from a life he had buried. He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it in half and put it in his shirt pocket and waited for the morning to come. Victor had not planned on bringing a child to work. He had not planned on any of this. But at 6 in the morning, with Lily awake and sitting at his kitchen table eating toast and watching him with the patient attention of someone who expected to be brought along, he had no other option. She walked into Caruso's deli like she owned it. Within 10 minutes, she had rearranged all the napkin holders so they faced the same direction. Within 20, she had identified the 3 stray cats behind the dumpster and given each of them a name: Meatball, Provolone, and Gravy, with the conviction of someone formalizing an existing arrangement. She greeted the morning regulars by asking their names before they could order, and 2 of them told her, which was 2 more conversations than those men had started in the deli in years. Victor stood at the counter and watched. The first crack came just before 9. Lily climbed onto a stool at the far end of the prep counter, pulled a laminated menu toward her, and began asking questions about it. Every item. What was in the Caruso special? Were the peppers hot or sweet? What did provolone taste like? Could you get the meatballs without the sauce? Did he make the bread himself? Victor answered every single one. He didn't notice he was almost smiling until old Dom Ferretti walked in, stopped dead, and stared at them both like he'd walked into the wrong building. Rosa's call came at 11:15. Her voice was flat and careful, the voice she used when the news was bad and she'd already decided how to present it. May's green card documentation was not misplaced. It was gone, flagged as unverifiable in the processing system, pending a documentation review that had no timeline. Without it, the case could stretch to 6 months or longer. Victor set down the bread knife. "That's not an accident." "No," Rosa said, "it's not." He made one more call. A contact in city records, a man who had helped him before in a different life and who asked no questions now. Duplicate documentation existed. It could be located, verified, and submitted through the proper legal channel within 72 hours. It wasn't fast enough, but it was something. A little after noon, a regular named Frank leaned across the counter while Lily was occupied feeding Provolone a slice of turkey in the back. "You know," Frank said quietly, "there are faster ways to handle a man like Lyndon." Victor looked at him. "That man is dead," he said. "I'm handling this the right way." Frank nodded once and took his sandwich and didn't bring it up again. At 2 o'clock, Lily finished a crayon drawing she'd been working on between customers. She climbed off the stool, walked to the deli's front window, and pressed it against the glass. A large orange cat with enormous eyes, labeled in uneven capital letters, Meatball. She stepped back to admire it. Victor was standing at the register when he looked up and saw it. A child's drawing, bright and crooked and full of color, taped to the window of Caruso's deli. He had taken Angela's drawings down 15 years ago and never put anything else up. He stood very still, his hands flat on the counter, and said nothing. Old Dom, on his way out, paused at the door and looked from the drawing to Victor. Then he looked at Lily, who was already back on her stool, uncapping a green crayon. "She doesn't know who you are, does she?" he said softly. Victor watched her. "No," he said, "and that's the best thing about her." Craig Lyndon's office on the 14th floor of the Wyndham Grand had a view of Center City that he genuinely believed he had earned. The awards on the wall, 12 of them, framed in matching black, said things like Regional Manager of the Year and Excellence in Operations. His desk was glass and chrome. His suit today was charcoal with a faint pinstripe, and when he moved through the hotel floor, he kept his hands clasped behind his back, the way a man does when he wants his staff to feel the weight of his presence. By 10 that morning, he had dismissed 2 voicemails from the families of detained workers. He had reviewed the new staffing agency contracts with the efficiency of someone doing routine maintenance. He had told his assistant, Sandra, who had been with the hotel for 9 years and who never smiled at him anymore, that the quarterly numbers were going to look very clean this cycle. The call from his contact at the processing center came at 11. An immigration attorney had filed documentation requests across all 9 detained cases simultaneously. She was asking for records audits, processing logs, and chain of custody documentation on every piece of paperwork flagged as missing. She was building a pattern argument, not just one worker, but all of them. Her name was Rosa Gutierrez. Sandra, when she heard the name, went very still. "Victor Caruso," she said. "She's been his attorney for 20 years. Lyndon looked at her. Then he picked up his phone and typed the name into the search bar. He scrolled for a long moment. The press coverage was old but dense. Racketeering. 3 federal investigations that never produced charges. A man who had walked away from the most dangerous organization in Philadelphia history and simply vanished into a deli on Passyunk Avenue. Lyndon set the phone down slowly. He was quiet for almost a minute. Then he called his contact at the processing center and told him to flag Mei Huang's file specifically. He dictated the details of a theft report. A guest bracelet, $2,800, allegedly missing from a room Mei had cleaned 2 weeks prior. No evidence, no footage citation, no witness. Just a report filed through the proper channel, added to a file already in motion. Criminal charges on top of an immigration hold. Let the attorney fight through that. "It's not personal," he told Sandra when she looked at him. "She's just the one who got a lawyer." The second call was to a producer at a local news station he had done favorable interviews with before. A tip, he said. A child connected to a detained hotel worker being housed by a man with documented ties to organized crime. Wasn't there a public safety angle there? Wasn't that worth asking about? The producer said they'd look into it. Lyndon hung up and straightened the nearest framed award on his wall. He had turned Victor's name, a liability, a spotlight, a risk, into a pressure point. Let the mob boss try to fight a CPS investigation while fighting a federal immigration case. He sat back in his chair and reached for his coffee. He was, he believed, untouchable. He had always believed that. It had always been true. He had no reason to think this time would be different. Rosa called at 7 in the morning. Victor was already at the counter, and Lily was already eating cereal, kicking her feet against the chair legs in a steady rhythm that had somehow become part of the soundtrack of his mornings. He took the call in the back. Felony theft charge. Filed 3 days ago, buried in the processing paperwork until Rosa's audit request surfaced it. A guest bracelet worth $2,800. May allegedly in the room. No footage provided, no evidence attached. Just the report, stamped and entered, now attached to a case that had been difficult and was now potentially catastrophic. Victor gripped the phone. "He filed a false police report," he said. "Yes," Rosa said. "And he knows it'll take weeks to disprove, which is weeks May stays detained." He went back to the kitchen. He turned on the small television on the counter, the one he never turned on, and found the morning news. The segment was already running. A reporter stood outside the deli, his deli. She used the words alleged ties and known associate and questions being raised with the practiced calm of someone who understood exactly what she was doing. The Chiron read, child of detained immigrant worker, housed by controversial figure. Lily was 10 feet away eating cereal. Victor turned the television off. When the phone rang again, a CPS caseworker scheduling a home visit, he answered it in the same quiet voice he answered everything. He wrote down the date. He thanked her. He hung up. He stood at the kitchen window for a long moment, looking at the backyard. Every move he made toward May brought more light onto him, and that light was now pointed at Lily. He thought about stepping back, about finding a different family for Lily to stay with, a name that wouldn't bring cameras to the front of a deli. It would be cleaner, safer for her. He was still thinking it through when the photo fell. It had been tucked behind the couch cushion, a framed photo that must have slipped from the side table. Lily picked it up before he could and turned it over. Angela, at 20, sitting on the front steps, laughing at something off camera. "Who's this?" Lily asked. "She looks nice." Victor took the photo. He looked at it for a long time. "She was," he said. He set the photo on the table and went to the back of his closet and found the number he was looking for. Then he called Rosa. Inside a detention facility 2 hours away, Mei Huang sat across a metal table from a guard who slid a document toward her without meeting her eyes. Voluntary departure agreement. Clean exit. Criminal charges dropped. Case closed. Mei picked up the pen. Her hand was shaking. She thought about Lily walking 14 blocks alone in the rain, in her red boots, to a face she recognized because she paid attention. She put the pen down. "I have a daughter in Philadelphia," she said. "I'm not leaving this country without her." Back in Philadelphia, Victor was already on the phone. "We're not slowing down," he told Rosa. "We're speeding up." Victor had not opened Angela's door in 15 years. He stood in the hallway at 2 in the morning, 4 days after the CPS call, with his hand on the knob and the house completely silent around him. He had been standing there for a while. Finally, he turned the knob. The room smelled like time, like something sealed. He turned on the small lamp and stood in the doorway looking at everything she had left behind. The posters, the books, the small wooden jewelry box on the dresser. And he let himself look without shutting it down. Then he got the boxes from the closet and began, slowly and carefully, to make room. He was gentle with everything. That was the part that would have surprised people who feared him. He folded her things the way you fold something you intend to keep. By the next morning, Lily had helped him pick out new sheets, yellow with small white flowers, because that was the only option at the corner drugstore, and Lily approved. She helped him put them on the bed with the seriousness of someone performing an important task. Diane Morell arrived at 10. She was tall, unhurried, and she carried a battered leather portfolio that had seen more homes than Victor could imagine. She shook his hand without hesitation, looked around the house with calm, trained eyes, and asked to speak with Lily alone. Victor waited in the kitchen for 22 minutes. He could hear Lily's voice through the wall. He couldn't make out the words, but it was constant, chattering, explaining, the occasional laugh, and he stood at the kitchen sink with his arms crossed and waited. Diane came back into the kitchen and set her portfolio on the table. She looked at him for a moment before she spoke. "That child in there isn't afraid," she said. "She isn't performing." A pause. "Whatever you're doing, she feels safe." Victor said nothing. "Don't make me regret leaving her here," Diane said. 30 days, Mr. Caruso. If the mother's situation isn't resolved, Lily enters the system. That's not a threat. It's just what the system requires." After Diane left, Victor sat at the kitchen table. Lily came in from the living room and climbed into the chair across from him, the same way she had climbed into the booth the night she arrived. "Is my mom coming home?" she asked. "I'm working on it," he said. "Are you going to get her?" "Yes." Lily studied him the way children study adults when they're deciding how much to believe. "Promise?" she said. Victor looked at her, at the uneven bob and the red boots she still wore indoors, and the absolute, unguarded trust in her face. He hesitated. Then, "Promise." Lily nodded once, satisfied, and went back to her crayons. Victor sat alone at the table with the weight of that word settling over him like a coat he hadn't worn in years. 30 days. He had never broken a promise to a child. He wasn't going to start now. 16 days left. Victor sat in his car on Passyunk Avenue at 9:30 at night, engine off, the deli dark behind him. Lily was asleep in the back seat, curled under his jacket, her red boots still on. He'd kept her at the deli too late, and she'd fallen asleep between the counter and the door, and he'd carried her out without waking her. He had a phone in his hand. On the screen was a number he hadn't called in 12 years. He sat with it for a long time. There were people from his old life who owed him things, not money, not loyalty. Loyalty in that world was weather. It changed without warning. What they owed him was the specific, irrevocable debt of a favor that could never be repaid with anything except another favor. The architecture of the world he had walked away from was built entirely on that exchange. He had tried to leave it behind. He had succeeded, mostly. He dialed. Anthony Race picked up on the third ring. The silence before he spoke was the kind that meant he had seen the number and taken a moment to decide. "You swore you'd never call this number," Rice said. A 7-year-old girl made me a liar, Victor said. Another silence. Victor could hear a television being muted somewhere in the background. He explained it cleanly. Mei Huang, 9 workers, Craig Linden, the fabricated theft charge, the missing documentation, the case buried in a processing facility with every incentive to let it rot. He didn't ask Rice to intervene directly. He asked for one name, someone inside the DHS Office of Civil Rights who could flag the case as a pattern of employer retaliation and ensure it received a fair, expedited federal review. Rice said he'd make one call. That was all Victor asked for. The second number belonged to Patricia Yoon. She answered immediately, like she'd been expecting it eventually. Victor had once protected her family from an extortion scheme that would have destroyed everything they'd built 17 years ago. And she had carried the debt with the same precision she brought to everything else. He asked her to audit Craig Linden, staffing contracts, financial records, tax filings, legally, thoroughly, within 2 weeks. I'll need access to the public filings, she said. Rosa will get you what you need. 2 weeks, Patricia said. Then she hung up. Victor set the phone on the seat. He looked in the rearview mirror at Lily sleeping. Her mouth was slightly open. One red boot had come half off. He had just done the thing he swore he would never do again. Reached into the old world and pulled out a favor. The debts, the access, the ability to make one call and move a machine that nothing else could move. That currency was still real. He had spent 15 years pretending otherwise. The cleanest thing he had ever tried to do was going to be built on the dirtiest money he had. He started the car and drove home slowly, watching the road while Lily slept in the back. 12 days left on the clock. Patricia Yoon came to Rosa's office on a Tuesday morning with wire-rimmed glasses, a black messenger bag, and the unhurried manner of someone who had already done the hard part. She sat down, removed a bound audit file, and slid it across the desk without ceremony. Rosa opened it and read without speaking for 4 minutes. 3 years, 2 Wyndham properties, $1.2 million in diverted funds, documented across falsified worker contracts, manipulated invoices, and tax filings altered so carelessly it almost looked intentional. He didn't even try to hide it well, Patricia said. Men like this never do. They assume no one's watching. The fabricated theft charge against Mei fell apart on page 11. Hotel security footage showed Mei Huang on the 4th floor during the entire window when the bracelet allegedly disappeared from a 7th floor room. Patricia had found no record of any theft complaint from any guest in the hotel's log. The police report had been filed by Linden's assistant. There was no bracelet. There never had been. Rosa filed the emergency motion that afternoon. Simultaneously, the DHS Office of Civil Rights, acting on the flag raised by Rice's contact, formally requested all documentation from Mei's processing facility and opened a pattern of retaliation review across all 9 detained workers. The processing center, suddenly under federal scrutiny, produced Mei's green card documentation within 48 hours. The documents they had claimed were missing. They had been there the entire time. Rosa drove to the facility on Thursday. She sat across from Mei in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and fluorescent light, and she laid it out plainly. The audit, the footage, the federal review, the motion, all of it. Mei listened without moving. She had spent 3 weeks refusing to sign the departure form. 3 weeks comforting the women who cried at night. 3 weeks writing letters to Lily she had no way to send. She was thinner. Her eyes were very steady. When Rosa finished, Mei reached into her pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between them. For Lily, she said, in case something still goes wrong. Nothing's going wrong, Rosa said. She called Victor on the drive back to Philadelphia. We have everything, Rosa said. Linden has no idea what's coming. Victor looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall. 12 days left. It was going to be enough. Day 22. 8 days left on the clock. The federal courtroom on Market Street was full by 8:30 in the morning. Workers' families filled the gallery, women in their good coats, men who had taken the day off from jobs they couldn't afford to miss, children who didn't fully understand what they were watching but sat quietly anyway, as if they knew the weight of the room. Rosa had organized the community advocates herself, calling in favors of her own. Reporters lined the back wall with their notebooks. Craig Linden arrived at 9 with his attorney, a silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than most of the gallery earned in a month. Linden walked in the way he always walked, straight-backed, gold watch catching the light, a man who had confused being well-dressed with being untouchable. He looked at the gallery and saw nothing that concerned him. He had not yet seen what Rosa had brought. She stood at the front of the courtroom in her plain dark blazer, reading glasses on the chain around her neck, a stack of documents arranged with military precision on the table before her. She began quietly. No theatrics, no raised voice. She laid out the staffing fraud first. 3 years, 2 properties, $1.2 million, falsified contracts, forged documents, tax filings that had been altered and re-altered. Each number landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. She presented the fabricated theft charge. The security footage played on the courtroom monitor, Mei Huang, timestamp visible, on the 4th floor, while the guest room in question sat untouched 2 floors above her. Rosa let the footage run for a full 15 seconds in silence. Linden's attorney objected, overruled, objected again, overruled again. Linden's face moved through stages, annoyance at the procedural inconvenience, confusion at the specificity of the evidence. Then, slowly, something that looked like recognition, then something that looked like the ground falling away beneath him. Rosa turned to face the bench for her closing summary. 9 women went to work, she said. 9 women were sold out by the man who signed their paychecks. 1 7-year-old girl walked 14 blocks in the rain to the only person who would listen. And that person did what institutions failed to do. He believed her. The judge ordered Mei Huang's immediate release, along with all 9 detained workers, and referred Linden's criminal case to the district attorney's office. As Linden walked out through the courthouse doors into the November light, 2 federal agents were waiting for him on the steps. The handcuffs went on in full view of the cameras. In the back of the courtroom, Victor stood with Lily's hand in his. He had not said a single word during the entire hearing. He didn't need to. Lily looked up at him. "Is it over?" she said. "Almost," he said. He squeezed her hand once. Tomorrow he would drive her to Pennsylvania. The processing facility was 2 hours from Philadelphia, out past where the highway narrowed and the trees took over and the sky got bigger and emptier. Victor drove. Lily sat in the back seat and could not stay still. She narrated everything they passed: a horse, a barn, a billboard for a diner, a field that she decided looked like a good place for a cat named Gravy. She asked how many more minutes 6 separate times. Victor answered every single one. He pulled into the parking lot just before 10 in the morning. The facility was a low concrete building with no windows that faced the outside and a single set of glass doors at the front. Victor parked and cut the engine, and they waited. At 10:14, the doors opened. May walked out in the clothes she had been wearing 31 days ago. She was thinner. Her hair was still pulled back tightly, the way it always was. She stood in the doorway for one moment, shielding her eyes against the light. And then she saw the red boots. Lily was already running. She crossed the parking lot at full speed, backpack bouncing, arms out, and May dropped to her knees on the asphalt and caught her daughter and pulled her in and held her so tightly that Lily made a small sound and buried her face in her mother's neck, and neither of them moved. They rocked together on the cold asphalt, both of them crying, May's shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that has been held back for too long and can't be contained any longer. Lily's hands gripping her mother's coat in 2 small fists. Victor stood 30 feet away with his hands in his pockets and watched. After several minutes, May rose. She said something quiet to Lily, who nodded and stepped back a half step, still holding her hand. May walked toward Victor. Rosa had told her everything. The $43,000 from the lockbox, the room he opened, the calls he made, the promise he had kept. She stopped in front of him and looked at this man. This man the whole neighborhood had feared for 30 years. And her eyes were red and her voice was unsteady, and she tried to find the words. "Lily told me," May said, barely above a whisper, "that you leave the kitchen light on for her every night." Victor's jaw tightened. "She asked me to," he said. May took both of his hands. Victor looked down at her hands, holding his. He had not been held by another person in 15 years, not since Angela. Something broke open inside him, quietly, the way ice breaks in early spring, not with a crack, but with a slow, inevitable give. He wept. Not for May, not even for Lily, for Angela, for himself, for every night he had spent alone in that house, believing he had used up his right to be loved. Lily slipped her hand into his from one side. May held the other. They stood there together in the cold parking lot until Victor was ready to move. The drive home was quiet. Lily fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes outside the city. May sat up front and occasionally looked back at her daughter and occasionally looked at Victor. Nothing needed to be said. Nothing was. 1 week later, Craig Linden sat in his attorney's office on the 15th floor of a Center City high-rise and stared at a speakerphone. The voice coming through it belonged to the corporate vice president of the Wyndham Grand Hotel Group, calling from the company's headquarters in Atlanta. The voice was calm, precise, the kind of calm that costs someone else everything. "Effective immediately," the VP said, "your employment is terminated. Your name will be removed from all properties. Severance is voided. The company is cooperating fully with the district attorney's investigation and will continue to do so." A pause. "You didn't just break the law, Craig. You made us the headline, and the brand doesn't survive headlines like this." The call ended. Linden sat looking at the silent phone for a long time. His attorney started talking about plea arrangements, cooperation agreements, potential sentencing ranges. Linden did not hear him. He was looking at the phone the way a man looks at a table that used to have something on it. All 9 detained workers were released within 48 hours of the hearing, their records cleared. Rosa filed a civil suit against the hotel corporation on their behalf the following week. That case was already moving. May did not go back to the Wyndham. A man named Gerald Park, who owned a smaller hotel 8 blocks from Passyunk Avenue and who had read about May's story in the Inquirer, called Rosa's office the morning after the hearing. He offered May a housekeeping supervisor position at $23 an hour. She started the following Monday. Victor resumed his routine at the deli. Same flannel shirt, same 5 a.m. opening, same coffee going cold at the corner table. But the corner table was different now. Every afternoon at 3:15, Lily came through the door, not pressing her face against the glass from outside, but walking straight in, backpack dropping by the booth, crayons spreading across the tabletop before she'd even sat down properly. She did her homework there. She talked to the regulars. She maintained the cat's feeding schedule, which was posted on the back door in her handwriting under the heading Official Cat Schedule. No exceptions. A woman named Carla, who had not set foot in the deli in 4 years, came in on a Wednesday with her 9-year-old son. She let him sit at the table near Lily. He borrowed a red crayon. Old Dom Ferretti, who had been coming in every morning for 11 years, looked at Victor behind the counter and gave a single slow nod, the kind of nod that meant something it would take too long to say. Victor gave one back. It was not a transformation. It was a thaw. Slow, earned, real. Outside, November was settling over Passyunk Avenue. Inside Caruso's deli, for the first time in a very long time, it was warm. 3 weeks after May walked out of that facility, Victor walked into Rosa's office and sat down across from her desk. He didn't say hello. He reached into his coat, took out a check, and slid it across. Rosa picked it up. She looked at the number. She set it back down and looked at him. Victor. "I want to establish a fund," he said. "Free legal representation, immigration and labor, workers in the greater Philadelphia area facing retaliation from their employers." He paused. "I want you to run it." Rosa looked at the check again. $187,000. "This is almost everything left in the lockbox," she said. "Yes." "Victor, that money came from a life I spent 15 years being ashamed of," he said. "Every dollar in that box is dirty. I want them gone. I want them to do the one clean thing they were never going to do any other way." Rosa was quiet for a moment. She had known Victor Caruso for over 30 years. She had seen him at his most dangerous and at his most diminished, and she had watched him, slowly and without announcement, become something she had not expected. She picked up the check. "I'll need a name for the fund," she said. Victor had already decided. "The Lily Huang Workers' Defense Fund," he said. Rosa put the check in her desk drawer and did not say anything else for a moment. Then she took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk and looked at him the way she hadn't looked at him in years. "Okay," she said. "Okay." May became the fund's first community liaison the following week. Her job was to go where the fear was, into hotel break rooms, restaurant back kitchens, factory floors, and find the workers who needed help but didn't know how to ask for it or didn't believe that asking was safe. She spoke Mandarin and Fujianese and halting Spanish and the universal language of someone who had been exactly where they were. The first case she brought in was a Guatemalan housekeeper named Elena, who had been threatened with termination for asking about her overtime pay. Elena sat in Rosa's office with her hands folded tightly in her lap and her eyes on the floor. May sat across from her and took her hands. "Someone fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself," she said. "That's what we do here." Elena looked up. A reporter from the Philadelphia Inquirer called Rosa about a feature. Victor refused to be interviewed. He refused to be photographed. He told Rosa to say whatever she needed to say and leave his name out of it. The story ran on a Thursday. Victor read it at the counter before opening. The headline said, "South Philly Deli Owner Funds Legal Defense for Immigrant Workers." Not one word about the mob. He folded the newspaper carefully and put it under the register. He didn't throw it away. 1 year later, autumn again. Passyunk Avenue at dusk smelled like provolone and roasted peppers, the same as it always had, drifting out from Caruso's deli and settling over the sidewalk like something warm and familiar. The amber light through the window was the same. The sign above the door was the same, but the deli was full. The corner table, the one where no one used to sit, the one where a regular once whispered to a newcomer you can sit anywhere you want, except that table, was occupied. It was always occupied now every afternoon at 3:15 by Lily Huang, age 8, 3rd grade, who spread her homework and her crayons across the surface with the confidence of someone who understood this table belonged to her. Victor worked the counter with an ease that would have been unrecognizable a year ago. He talked to customers. He answered questions about the menu without being asked twice. He looked up occasionally at the corner table, and something in his face had changed. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough. The heaviness was still there. It would always be there. But underneath it, something had shifted. Something had been given room. May came in at 5:30 after her shift. This was the rhythm of their days now. A standing appointment that nobody had ever officially made. She sat at the counter and Victor poured 2 coffees without being asked, and they talked for a few minutes about small things. Lily's homework, the weather turning, the fund's newest cases, 34 workers represented in its first year, Rosa opening a second office in North Philadelphia, 3 hotel managers in the region who had quietly restructured their labor contracts after reading about what happened to Linden. Craig Linden had pleaded guilty to 7 counts of fraud and tax evasion, 4-year federal sentence. His name was scrubbed from every property he had ever managed. Outside, on the back door of the deli, Lily's feeding schedule for meatball, provolone, and gravy was still posted in purple marker, slightly weather-worn but legible. Official cat schedule. No exceptions. Lily finished her homework and came to the counter with a folded piece of paper held out in both hands. She unfolded it on the counter in front of Victor. 2 figures in a deli, drawn in crayon. Surrounding them, an improbable number of cats. Underneath, in her careful 8-year-old handwriting, "My friend Victor." He looked at it for a long moment. Then he took it to the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the prep counter, the cabinet from the very beginning, the one that faced inward. And he took the drawing off the wall. Angela's drawing, the faded one, the house, the 2 stick figures, the lopsided sun, hidden for 15 years. He taped Lily's drawing to the kitchen wall first, then carefully he taped Angela's beside it. 2 drawings, side by side, the old one and the new, the daughter he had lost and the daughter who had found him. Lily appeared beside him and looked at both. She pointed at Angela's drawing, at the girl with the wobbly name written in the corner. "Now she's not alone anymore," Lily said. Victor couldn't speak. He nodded. Then he turned back to the counter where a customer was waiting. "What can I get you?" he said. The same words, a different man. Sometimes the people who've done the most wrong are the ones who fight hardest to do right. And a 7-year-old girl who walked 14 blocks in the rain didn't just find shelter that night. She gave it.